Today, we're going to be talking psychological safety. So if you follow me on LinkedIn, you will know that I recently posted an article. I've actually sent this article to several clients about psychological safety. Psychological safety is a big part of below the surface leadership. And it's interesting because it's one of those concepts, again, I think a lot of people think it's just DEI. It's not. It's a leadership concept. It was really about being able to speak up, about, to collaborate. It's about innovation. It's about any type of wrongdoing, ethical. So it's about so much more. In our workshops, people will say, oh my gosh, I didn't even know I needed this. Yeah, because there are a lot of benefits to having safety that we don't know, because a lot of these concepts got really popular during 2021. That was the era that we were in, that it was just DEI, but it's more than DEI. Psychological safety as a policy is the next one. And so again, it's a means to an end. It's not the end all. Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Leading Below the Surface podcast. I'm your host, LaTonya Wilkins, award-winning author, executive coach, and founder and CEO of Change Coaches. So today I have a great solo episode for you. And before we get into it, I also want to give everybody just a little bit of a calendar of how we're going to be doing the podcast moving into the fall. So the next two episodes will be solo episodes. Really excited about those. I think you will be too. So I'll get into what those will be. And then we'll get back into the guest episodes. But a couple of really fun announcements. So number one, if you follow me on LinkedIn, you've probably seen that the second edition of Leading Below the Surface, yes, folks, the second edition of Leading Below the Surface will be out in September. So I'm really excited about that. So for those of you that didn't read the first edition, Leading Below the Surface is my best-selling book. I wrote it in 2021. The reason why I decided to do a second edition is because below the surface leadership is needed today more than ever. And there were also some considerations that I had when I wrote the book. I wrote it, like I said, in 2020. I was I was in the thick of it. And there's just a lot that has changed in the world. And so we've updated it to reflect that as a second edition. I've always wanted this book to be evergreen, and I think the second edition really gets us closer to that. So uh, check it out. It'll be out in September. I will have the exact date here soon, but it'll be at a bookstore near you. You could get that on Bookshop, Amazon, Barnes and Nobles, all the major sellers. And so I'll make sure that everybody knows when that's coming out. So be sure to follow me on LinkedIn, and be sure to get on our newsletter as well, and that link is in the comments. The second thing I wanted to say is that my next episode will be all about below the surface leadership. So we have a wonderful below the surface leader community, and this episode will be for you. This will be for other folks. But it's this below the surface community. A lot of you say, oh my gosh, like, I'm a below the surface leader. I want to create other below the surface leaders in my company. What's the business case? So another reason why I did the second edition of my book is that there are a lot of misconceptions about below the surface leadership. And one of the biggest ones is it's just about DEI. It's not. It's about leadership. It's about leading in the future. It's about leading in now, which now is the future. And I just, unfortunately, as much as I hate to say it, the world is going to get more and more complex. It's going to get more and more difficult to navigate. Honestly, that is why I wrote Living Below the Surface. And so my next episode will be all about 10 ways that you can use below the surface leadership in your organization. How can you apply it to different problems that you're having right now? Yeah, it'll be about 10 ways to apply the below the surface leadership, what that looks like. So if that's something you're interested in, definitely follow the podcast. If you're loving the podcast, leave a review. Also, please pass it on. So let's get into today's episode. So today we're going to be talking about one of my favorite topics, psychological safety. So if you follow me on LinkedIn, you will know that I recently posted an article on LinkedIn. It was written by Amy Edmondson and Michaela Carisi. Hopefully, I'm saying their name right. And it was in Harvard Business Review. I've actually sent this article to several clients, or mainly organizational clients, and I highly recommend it. If you read it and you want to discuss it, let's discuss. But today, and I'd love to hear any thoughts that you have as I go through this about psychological safety, like how you're, like any misconceptions you're seeing at your org, because this is really important stuff because it's a lot of what we're seeing today. Psychological safety has always been important, but it's more important than ever with all the changes. One thing I want to say is psychological safety is a big part of below the surface leadership. And it's interesting because it's one of those concepts. Again, I think a lot of people think it's just DEI. It's not. It's a leadership concept. And when Amy Edmondson wrote The Fearless Organization, was in there. Um, it's it's in the right kind of wrong, but it was really about being able to speak up, about, to collaborate. It's about innovation. It's about um, any type of wrongdoing, ethical. So it's about so much more. In my second edition of my book that's coming out, we actually enhanced that chapter a little bit to be able to talk about that. All right. So what am I going to talk about today with psych safety? I'm going to focus on like a lot of what I read in this article, what I'm seeing in psychological safety, some of the trends that I'm seeing. This actually tied really well into a couple of the workshops that we do, are in the process of being updated on our website. But we have a couple of different psychological safety for leaders workshops. And we have all my keynotes include psych safety as part of them. First thing, so I'm going to go through this article and I'm going to talk about, again, the things that I'm seeing with psychological safety as I go through these misconceptions. Like I said, I also love to see some of the things that you're seeing. I'm also going to talk about how this might apply to your organization, how you can use it, and then we will end with some steps that you can take to educate your workplace around psychological safety and what it means today. Because again, I think a lot of people get caught up that it's just DEI. It's again, and DEI is not bad or good. It's just the way I see DEI, it's culture. So, and that's what I talk about in my book. So it's not, it can't just be DEI. The first misconception in this article is psychological safety means being nice. Oh my gosh. Okay. So this one I've seen, I'll let you read the article, but I'll give you my take on this. So it means being nice. So the big place that I see this is in organizations where frustrated with performance. Their leaders aren't performing at the levels they want them to be performing. When we talk about at Change Coaches, when we talk about psychological safety and how that might be a means to an end, people think, well, that means avoidance. That means we're going to start being too nice. That's going to make the problem worse. But what if it didn't mean that? What if it didn't mean being nice? Like, there's actually research that says that there's a relationship between psychological safety and accountability. I actually have an article about this on my website. I'll post it in the comments. But basically, think about this. Like my friend Sylvia Molina wrote a book about supportive accountability. But think about it this way. Think about if you have accountability, right? And I think a lot of orgs think accountability is laying down the law. Oh my gosh, I got to stick it to them. And I think with the way the leadership that government leadership is evolving around the world, there is a lot of that. There's a lot of punishment. There's even people saying empathy is not important. But what if accountability wasn't that at all? What if accountability included empathy? And Sylvia Molina talks about supportive accountability. What if you supported people to be more accountable, right? Um, and let's play this out. And this is something that we've actually worked with leaders on. So let's say like we had a cohort of leaders that took our assessment, and accountability was the biggest one. That was the biggest item where this team was having issues, and was the biggest place that they could develop, the biggest opportunity. But think about this. So, and this is something we took this team through and they saw results. But think about if you support people to be able to do their jobs and to be able to excel in their jobs. And then if you keep doing this, they start trusting you, they start feeling safe. And so then when something comes up, they drop the ball, they make a mistake, maybe they don't hit their targets. They feel safe coming to you and telling you proactively, right? Instead of you having to chase them, you having to correct. Actually, I saw this work really well when I was in corporate. My corporate days, I was a culture leader in my last role at the Geese College of Business, and sometimes they put me they use me as an HR person, which wasn't my favorite thing, but, I leaned into coaching for that, but, that we had people that were having performance issues, and instead of me just laying down the law, getting them out of there or whatever, what I would do is, um, use some coach like, create the safety with me, and then they would come to me over time with a decision. Hey, folks, I'm going to interrupt us, take a really quick break to tell you about 4 ways that we could support you individually or your organization this fall. First off, we could do coaching, whether it's one-on-one, short sprint, CEO coaching, or something for groups or teams. Speaking, you could book me for one of my impactful keynotes. I'm actually going to be releasing the second edition of Leading Below the Surface, so check out my new keynotes workshops. You can choose from pre-built workshops, or we could do a custom workshop, and then facilitation and listening. We have listening labs, offsites, listening sessions, all of these things to help you build a roadmap to build trust. So if one of these feels right, let's talk. You can head over to changecoaches.io and reach out to info@changecoaches.io to get a conversation started. And usually that decision was to depart. I mean, I would say I don't think there's been many of those conversations where the person didn't decide to depart on their own and tell me. Yeah, there's been layoffs and things that I've been involved with, unfortunately, or downsizing. But when it's a conversation and it's like performance or it's something that you're expecting a result of out of that you're not getting, then this really works. Psychological safety really works. Okay, so the second misconception in the article is psychological safety means getting your way. I'm not going to talk about this one too much. You can check out the article. I don't see this as much. I do see people saying, I don't feel psychologically safe, but it's not really psychological safety. It's like I'm being held accountable the ways that I don't want to be held accountable, or I feel like I feel burnout, or I feel but that's not the same thing, folks. It's like it's okay to feel that way, but it's not always psychological safety. All right. Sometimes there's other things that are going on that um, are the problem, right? And I think when we use it as a way to express every problem that we have and blame that on safety, then we're really missing what's going on. And I also think that align with this article, if you're getting your way, I think, again, people use this to get the way that I've seen it, where people use it to get their way, is they'll use it as a catch all. Like instead of saying, I'm burnt out, or instead of saying, I need these hours, and your employer says no, or your employer says, come into the office, several days a week. Like we're seeing this right now. And if you're saying like you don't feel like, let's say you express that to your boss and your boss says, no, we have to do this. That's not, and you and your boss are fine. But besides this, that's not a lack of safety. I mean, maybe it is. And if you have a case for that, email me at info@changecoaches.io. But again, I think a lot of people use this as a way of getting, or use this as a means to getting their way. All right. What's the third one? So third one, psychological safety means job security. That one is a big one. That actually relates to what I was just talking about, that psychological safety means job security. So if your job is downsized, or sometimes it's everything is fine and your job is downsized, or sometimes your job is going to be downsized. But if to conflate that with psychological safety is actually not correct, right? That's not what psychological safety is. So yeah, it could be that you think your company made a bad decision. Maybe you are unsafe to talk about the layoffs with other people, like those types of things. Yeah, maybe that, like, you can't speak up against the layoffs, where maybe you're not feeling safe in that situation or in the layoff process. One way you may not feel safe in the layoff process that's valid is when we're seeing these layoffs happen that are over email or on Zoom, right? That is a situation that would create a lack of psychological safety. And I've heard of this happening with people that actually loved their orgs and everything was fine until that. Again, psychological safety doesn't mean that it's that you can't feel unsafe by the way it was done. But I would say ask yourself, if are you really feeling unsafe with your company? Or are you feeling unsafe with the situation and how it happened? Next one, psychological safety requires a trade-off with performance. Actually, I think that's opposite. You get better performance, and we talk a lot about that in our workshops. We get better collaboration with safety. In our workshops, people will say, "Oh my gosh, I didn't even know I needed this." Yeah, because there are a lot of benefits to having safety that we don't know, because a lot of these concepts got really popular during 2021. That was the era that we were in, that it was just DEI, but it's more than DEI. Psychological safety as a policy is the next one. And so again, it's a means to an end. It's not the end all. And then psychological safety requires a top-down approach. So that's one that I want to end with. So this is not true. And I love that uh, Amy Edmondson et al., I love how they highlighted this one in their article. Actually, this one really drove home for me, because I'm seeing this a lot. Like, we're waiting around for other senior leaders to provide us with safety. I mean, we do talk about the forest fire effect, and that's true. If one leader is unsafe, then the whole org is you're modeling unsafe behavior for everyone. So usually a entire uh, organization is unsafe, especially if these are prominent leaders. But yeah, you always get a diamond in the rough, right? And even in my corporate days, I always worked for the diamonds in the rough. Like, even when I worked in companies that I didn't really love the company, I loved my manager, and they would make me feel safe. So, but I talk a lot about mutual psychological safety. We practice that a lot in our Coaching Below the Surface ICF training experience. That new cohort will be opening up in November, so you'll be hearing more about that. But it's not top down. It can be peer to peer, it can be bottom up, but there are many tactics that you can use to create that safety. I mean, we've actually been working with um, a senior leadership team, which is a group of directors, and they're creating, like, their own safety mechanisms that can actually ripple across the organization. And so it's not just that, it's not just your boss. Think about your team. There's been a lot of teams that we've worked with, and they actually create take turns with activities and structures that create psychological safety in every meeting, and that creates it, right? And the boss participates. So it's not just top down, it's not just initiatives. Everybody is responsible. And that's why we have two different workshops. One is for leaders, and the other is for everyone else. I talked about the 6 misconceptions in this Harvard Business Review article. You'll see the notes in the comments. So I'm going to wrap up with 3 tips to continue keeping psychological safety alive in your organization. So what are these 3 tips? So the first tip is to educate your leaders on what psychological safety is and isn't. Again, I think we kind of got into it. We were in an era, and I think, again, it was kind of all DEI, but there's so much more. And again, it's not that DEI is bad. It's just that that is not the main thing on CEOs' minds, whether we like it or not. There's a lot, and a lot of business minds is AI, wellness, well-being, um, like uncertainty, and all psychological safety speaks to all those things. So that's the first thing, is educating. And that takes me into number 2, talking about and exploring how psychological safety, how a psychological safety workshop, how a psychological safety mindset and structures could be useful in your organization. I'm happy to chat with you about that if you're still thinking about this and you're not really sure. I also encourage you to listen to my next episode because I'm going to talk about 10 ways that below the surface leadership can help you in organizations and in life. And this will also help in your life. And I would say number 3 is call out fads in your organization. This is not a fad. Psychological safety is not a fad. It's let's think about Maslow's hierarchy of needs, right? We're still talking about that. And even though we're still talking about it, even though there's been theories, there's been academics that have said, right, this isn't research based, this doesn't have merits, but we still talk about it. I think we'll be talking about psychological safety for a long time. So this isn't a fad. So maybe in your org, revisit why it was a fad in the first place. And I'm thinking for a lot of orgs, it's a fad, or it was considered a fad because it was really tied to DEI. And for better or worse, I think there were a lot of orgs that got really performative and they wanted to just do something now. And psychological safety was part of it. It was kind of the happy medium. And then they thought, oh, that's a DEI thing. That's not me. No. Okay. Those are the 3 tips that I have for you to move forward. And again, everyone, be sure to listen to my next episode, which is going to be all about 10 ways to apply below the surface leadership in your organization. I really appreciate all you listeners. Thank you for sharing the podcast. Thank you for all the comments I get, and we'll see you next time. Thank you for listening to the Leading Below the Surface podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, please take a moment to share it with someone who needs to hear it. And I'd love to connect with you. So follow me on LinkedIn at LaTonya Wilkins. And if something resonated, send me a note at info@changecoaches.io. I read these messages regularly. Thank you and see you next time.